Good morning. I don't mean to interrupt you all, but we do need to get moving so that we can have a lot of fun today. Good morning. Welcome again. It's good to see everybody here. And without further ado, I would like to introduce to you and invite up here Reverend Fritz Hudson. He's a minister with the Unitarian Church of Lincoln, and he will tell you all about the Reverend Christine Robinson.
She didn't mean that, Christy, not all. Not all. So, Prairie Star friends, old and new. Cedar Rapids, as a matter of fact, is my Unitarian Universalist hometown. People's Church, the old People's Church on 3rd Avenue, first introduced our faith practice to me as a college student now 43 years ago, so I'm comfortable here. But I'm very pleased to introduce you now to one of my oldest, no, I shouldn't say that, one of my longest suffering friends in the ministry, Christine Robinson. Christine and I met 30 years ago. We were at a Unitarian Universalist ministers conference in Bethesda, Maryland, as I remember it, which fittingly is her Unitarian Universalist hometown. She grew up in the River Road Church there, and we were young then, I remember. Still, Christine had by then received a music degree from Baldwin Wallace College, called college, right? And a divinity degree at Boston University. She was succeeding at that point in her first parish in Columbia, South Carolina, not far from my own first ministry in North Carolina. And since then, she has acquired age well, I have observed on many occasions, and accomplished a few things, too. You've been married to William now for how many years? 27 years. That's right, 27 years. And Kevin, your son, graduates from college this year and an expert in 3D animation. And any of you who have a job in that field, she wants to see you immediately after these words. Let's see, you've been a minister in Albuquerque, New Mexico, now for 25 years. I think I've got that number right. Very successfully, 800 members, and you were describing the branches, 3 branches and a senior citizen group out in the hinterlands, completely ministered by, mostly by video, remote. You go out there every once in a while, is that right? Is that how it works? Very good. We're just learning about campus ministry in our district. We can learn that from her. She may well tell us about it today, for all I know. You've become a mini backyard farmer with 5 chickens, 4 fruit trees, and a few rows of vegetables. And I have to tell you, I've seen your backyard. Those are cozy chickens. That's a little group, I know. Actually, you've seen my backyard, too, when you preached my installation in Lincoln, Nebraska. But that was not your first or only connection to our Prairie Star district. You had chaired the Unitarian Universalist Association's Holmes Weatherly Award Committee. That's way back there, because we were on it together. It annually honors, as a national Unitarian Universalist social justice leader, a person who keeps alive the legacy of Arthur Weatherly, along with John Haynes Holmes, who served both our Iowa City congregation and our Lincoln congregation. So she was coming toward us, those many years ago. That's, of course, not her only national Unitarian Universalist leadership. You've preached what we call the big one at our General Assembly. That's the Berry Street essay. William Ellery Channing himself gave the first Berry Street essay. It was in his own parlor on Berry Street in Boston. Our Unitarian Universalist Skinner House Press has published your work. 3 books on sale at the conference bookstore and awaiting your signature after purchase. You have to buy it and then you get to sign it. That's the deal at any of the breaks between now and the end of the first workshop period when Christine will need to leave to go back to Albuquerque. Let's see, 2 of them are on small group ministry and 1 an interpretation of the Tao Te Ching, the Chinese scripture. Over all of those years, in the midst of all of those accomplishments, however, I know that Christine has sometimes gotten a little discouraged or downhearted about ministry and churches. And no, I will not divulge anything that you said in one of our year-in-review coffee sessions at General Assembly. Ministers hold confidences sacred, and what's said at GA between ministers, that's the holiest of holies of confidences. Those are dear to my heart, but I will share that you have publicly said was a moment of truth for you when you were in your office sorting your mail and grumbling, perhaps beneath your breath, of course, about the church, and your hand hit a flyer from a church consulting organization, which you were just about to fling into recycling, when the corner of your eye caught the consultant's motto on the envelope, right? And you stopped in mid-throw and read, again, resources for people who care about congregations. Damn, you said, that is me. I'm a person who cares about congregations. Guess I can't trade in the ministry for that new career bagging groceries that I was so looking forward to. I have to go back into the vineyard. So here we are again, still, you and me, and all of these people so dear to me, and I am so pleased to ask you to tell us about Unitarian Universalism facing the future.
Thank you, Fritz. And thank you all for having me here with you this morning. I want to talk this morning about how the religious ecology that we UUs live and work in has changed since this district got started in the middle of the last century, and what we have to do if we want to survive and thrive and serve in this century for the next 50 years. These are interesting times for religious people, as in that curse, may you live in interesting times. And I want to motivate us all to live in these interesting times with a heart softened towards change and caring enough about the institution that has nurtured us in our lives that we are willing to let it change in ways that will allow it to serve for generations to come. I feel urgent about this. I was raised in this faith. I found a place here during every era of my life, even though my theology and spirituality, family circumstances, and material fortunes have changed several times. It's hard for me to imagine a good life without Unitarian Universalism. And I'm worried about us. After 3 decades of very modest growth during a population boom, which can only be called a success when measured against our compatriots in mainstream faiths, which have plummeted in numbers, we've now started to shrink too. Last year was our 4th year of small declines, that 4th year that our good statistician Stephen Jonason says is the critical time when you start to worry. And unlike the Methodists and the Presbyterians, which were this big to begin with and now are this big, we were this big to begin with. It will take very little shrinkage to make us no longer viable as a religious institution. So if I sound cranky at times, it's the crankiness of love and fear. The religious institutions of a culture occupy a part of the social ecology, just like, say, a particular mammal, a coyote, occupies a particular part of the natural ecology. That part will sometimes be bigger and sometimes be smaller, depending on what the other occupants of the ecology are doing. The coyote who ran free among many packs over the plains, existing on incautious rabbits, for instance, may find itself with only a few other coyotes in a regional park surrounded by suburbia. It will, through no fault of its own, then occupy a much smaller place in that ecology. And if it wants its kind to survive, it will adapt and change. It will learn about picnic tables, mice, the joys of escaped urban chickens, and about the dangers of getting too friendly with the tourists. As a matter of fact, coyotes have adapted very nicely to suburbia and are thriving in their new ecology. We also need to adapt. The place of religion in the ecology of our culture has changed and is much smaller than it was 50 years ago. Furthermore, our particular niche within this particular smaller slice of the cultural pie has also changed. Since we're not coyotes, our first question is not, what do we eat, but rather, whom do we serve? And the answer is not only that we can serve fewer and fewer people, but also that they will be different people, and they will come to us with different needs. Different questions, but the same answer, change. In the middle of the last century, the religious ecology of America was church-going. And this was seen as a very positive thing for society. The 3 TV networks, which provided black and white entertainment to the nation, all ran public service announcements late in the week suggesting that the weekend was coming and people should plan to attend the church or synagogue of their choice. Who remembers this? Right, a lot of you. Sometimes this slogan was on signs just outside of town. In small towns, still have signs like that. People who didn't go to church or synagogue in that cultural ecology kept the fact quiet. There was nothing else to do on Sunday in most locales besides go to church. Polite persons did not even mow their lawns on Sunday morning in deference to the churchgoers, and shopping was out of the question because anything larger than the 7-Eleven was not open. One of the first things asked of a new neighbor in that ecology was what denomination they belonged to, because helping new neighbors settle into a church community was considered to be neighborly. Let's call this ecology religion privileged. All religions benefited from this general positive regard. America was a church-going society. In that religious ecology, Unitarian Universalists served people whose beliefs were not orthodox and who felt so uncomfortably hypocritical in orthodox congregations that they took it upon themselves to find a place where they would be free to believe what their hearts and minds suggested to them was true. Let's call that niche in the ecology the freedom niche. I'll just make up a slogan for that. We honor your religious freedom. Sound familiar to you? Kind of comfy, right? This religion-privileged ecology started to change as the baby boomers came of age as religious adventurers, meditating, exploring Hare Krishna, and proclaiming harmonic convergences. They joined their mothers in the feminist revolution, adding the feminine divine to the new religious possibilities that immigration was bringing to our shores. Religion-privileged culture lasted the longest in the South, in small towns, and in rural areas. But the change was powered by many factors, and it turned out to be inexorable. In most places in our nation today, the religious ecology has changed completely. We are not just Catholics, Protestants, and Jews anymore, and it is a very long time since you heard anyone suggest that you should consider worshiping this weekend at the church or synagogue of your choice. Now, soccer teams play on Sunday mornings in most communities, and the stores are all open. Parents who want to give their children every advantage are regularly choosing the advantages they get from playing team sports over the advantages they get from religious education. There being only so much time in a 2-worker family these days. People feel no particular compunction to belong to a congregation, especially younger people. It's brunch, not church, is the way they spend their precious weekend time in larger and larger numbers. That is to say, if they don't have to work, which many of them do. I'll call the ecology that we now occupy religion skeptical. It has a much smaller market share of social attention, and it's lost prestige. Many people, younger ones in particular, experience the religious part of the landscape as downright troublesome. They are exasperated at the heavy-handed way the religious right attempted to mold the culture over the past 25 years or so. Young people's experience of cultural and sexual diversity means that, churched or unchurched, they disdain traditional church teachings on homosexuality and on hell. They've always had friends of all faiths and no faiths, gay and straight, and many just don't believe the traditional church teachings that say that God only loves straight people who subscribe to their particular creed. They find religious institutions in general to be inward-focused and self-protective, and the simply dreadful response of the Catholic Church to its clergy pedophile crisis is, for them and for many Americans, Exhibit A of that complaint. All these forces have caused religion to lose privileged place and market share. Now, it also has to be said that in spite of the sea change in institutional loyalty, the general beliefs of the different generations have not changed that much in 50 years, with those two notable exceptions. Younger people believe in God, pray, and expect some kind of afterlife in about the same proportions as their parents and grandparents. The same 2% or so of them are atheists. But whether or not they identify with any specific religious tradition, and whether or not they actually attend any specific congregation, there are two ways that younger people are notably different from their elders. A large percentage of them are Universalists. They don't believe that God sends people who believe differently from them to hell. And a large portion of them also believe that homosexuality is a normal human variation, not a sin. So, same general religious beliefs, but increasingly uninterested in pursuing them in traditional religious institutions, even ours. Further, more and more people have cast themselves free from religious affiliation altogether. These are the Nuns, N-O-N-E-S. The Nuns are people who say that they do not identify with any religious tradition. Not just that they don't participate, that's a whole other group, but that they have no religious identity. They are not Christians, they are not Jews, they are not Muslims, they are none. This group has been getting larger over the past 60 years. As you see, in 1950, about 2% of the people, almost all atheists, identified that way. Now, up to 16% in 2010, skyrocketing even since then. Furthermore, this group is stratified by age, and each successive generation has had a larger proportion of members who are religiously unaffiliated. So in 2012, about 8% of persons over 65 told researchers that they had no religious affiliation. 32% of young adults said that. These are some of the inexorable reasons for the decline in the space that religion occupies in our current social ecology. With each passing year, affiliation overall decreases in all age brackets, and the most loyal and committed cohorts, that is, those of you over the age of 55, successively are aging out of participation and being replaced by the cohort of younger adults who are much more likely to have no interest in and no connection to religious institutions. Decline has hit liberal Protestantism the hardest. The Methodist Church has declined by 30% since 1970. The Presbyterians in America have declined by 20% since the year 2000. Southern Baptists have started to see a decline, as have Christian evangelicals as a whole. The only religious groups to post increases during these years are those who minister specifically to immigrants, such as the Catholic Church, and those with high birth rates, such as the Mormons and Orthodox Jews. As to Unitarian Universalism, we have basically stayed the same size for 30 years, while the population as a whole rose by 30%. We're now in the fourth year of a modest decline after a couple of decades of very small yearly increases. So the nun phenomenon seems to have been delayed slightly with us. There's interesting possible reasons for that I won't go into. It now seems to be beginning to affect us also. and is likely to affect us a lot more. And if we want to survive and thrive, we're going to have to adapt and change. And change is hard, I know. One possible response to this challenge is to just give up. If the culture doesn't want church anymore, then, well, maybe it's futile or too much trouble to keep ourselves going, or maybe it's just going to be impossible, and therefore we should accept with grace the inevitable and move on. Well, I'm not ready for that. I don't think you are either. I believe that the culture needs congregations, and also it needs our kind of congregations. So if we're ready to move into a future that is going to be increasingly different from the past, let's just spend a moment inspiring ourselves, because we are not the first institutional species to find ourselves struggling with change or die, and some have done a splendid job of change. For instance, remember the libraries of the 20th century? Packed with books, right? Places for books, shelves and shelves of books, and chairs and tables to seat people reading books, and librarians saying, shh. And if you'd asked one of those librarians what the mission of the library was, she would have almost certainly said, to make books available to the public. Right? Great niche in the 20th century. I'm sure that many of you have been in a public library in the last 5 years or visited a library website. I wonder if you've been in a library which has been renovated in the last 5 years, and I'm sure that lots of you can tell me what libraries now had that they didn't have 30 years ago. Computers, exactly. Ranks and ranks of computers. Computerized catalogs, computerized databases, digital books, Wi-Fi and computer access for people who don't have it at home, and Kindles to loan out to the public. Giving the public access to books, that wonderful niche in the 19th and 20th centuries, has morphed into give the public access to information. And our nation is better off for the fact that libraries have not become dead houses of musty books read only by people over 50, right? Our democracy is stronger, our lives are fairer, we're all more secure for that. There are a lot of things that religious people can learn from libraries and librarians. What I want to hold up this morning is the courage to change by developing a new mission and a new set of services in a changing world. Let me tell you another interesting story. This is the story of Campfire Girls. Y'all have campfire around here? Sort of know what I'm talking about. When I was 7 years old, the most important decision I made all year was whether to cast my lot with the red, white, and blue-clad Campfire Girls or with the green and brown-clad Girl Scouts. I picked Campfire Girls. And every week, can you see the resemblance? Every week during the school year, I walked with my little troop of Campfire Girls to one girl's house, and we spent the afternoon doing crafts and service projects and just socializing together. This lasted only a few years for me, but my sister lasted all the way through high school, made lifelong friends, worked summers at a camp where the boys on the staff included my brother, and both of my siblings met their future spouses at that camp. So it was a big part of our lives. Fast forward to the year my son went to 4th grade in a new school where the after-school program was provided as a fee for service by none other than an outfit called Campfire Kids. Clearly related. I was intrigued. How did this sea change happen in mission and operations, I wondered. So I got in contact with one of my sister's lifelong friends who still works for Campfire, and I asked her. She said, Campfire's mission, when we were growing up, Christine, was to serve the world by enhancing the lives of girls. And we did that by providing after-school clubs supervised by leader mothers and camps run mostly by volunteers. In the 1970s, we got hit with a huge cultural change. The feminist revolution sent most of our leaders into the workplace. Title IX sent most of our girls to the soccer field after school. And all girls anything was a threatened species. So what we faced, she says, was change or die. And we sucked it up and asked ourselves, what today's children need. And it was clear to us that what they needed, boys and girls alike, was safe and enriching programs after school, at their school, with paid leadership. So now that's one of our program areas, fee-for-service after-school programs. Our mission, she says, is to help young people change the world by finding their spark, lifting their voice, and discovering who they are. Which is pretty inspiring, isn't it? For us UUs, our mission used to be a church that offered freedom from orthodoxy in a religiously privileged world. How does this change in a religiously skeptical world? Well, it turns out quite a lot. People used to come to us because we honor your religious freedom, but that doesn't bring people to us anymore. Now, when people decide that they don't believe what they were raised to believe, they often go for years without belonging to any congregation at all, and in this new religious ecology, they are under no pressure to join one. When they decide they want to go to church again, it's not because they want freedom. They've had freedom. They come looking for something they can't get in the secular world. They want spiritual instruction, not freedom. They want a safe place to explore what happens to them when they start to deepen their lives. When they come to us, they come because they know their beliefs are not orthodox and because they would feel hypocritical in an orthodox church in that they resemble us, their elders. But once with us, they want to do very different things. Here's my guess at a slogan for this new part of our religious ecology, a place where we religious coyotes can call our very own and serve with integrity and thrive. Spiritual growth in a theologically diverse community. So here's the old and the new. I made that formulation for myself and my church about 15 years ago. I didn't tell them at first. I just kind of started operating that way. It might not be the only viable niche for us in this new ecology. It might not be viable everywhere. I do know that as I have leaned into this way of thinking about who comes to us and what they want, my church has grown from 500 to 800 members. I say that not to brag, but because I want to say I think we have significant hope in this new religious ecology. I note that there are other lively growing churches in our movement, and they tend to be thinking along exactly the same lines. And of course, we continue to serve our traditional constituents, the freedom seekers of older generations. We're not going to adopt a creed or a my way or the highway approach to religion. But we've tweaked our mission in Albuquerque, like libraries and Campfire, and it has worked. Here's our new sanctuary. Not quite finished yet. And I show that not to brag. Well, actually, I do want to brag. But also because I know, you and I know, don't we, that buildings like this are built by the old constituency, not the new one. And the old constituency has to be happy with what's going on in their church to be willing to pay for something like that. So back to our problem. One bright spot for us in the religious statistics is the fairly large percentage of the nuns who say that they are spiritual but not religious. They are a large and growing group of mostly younger adults. They share important beliefs and social norms with us, remember? They are mostly Universalists, mostly tolerant, they mostly like religious diversity, but they are not interested in us because they are spiritual but not religious. That is to say, they are interested in personal enlightenment, depth of life, peace of mind, service to the world, and religious learning, but they are suspicious of religious institutions. And one reason they don't flock to our doors is because they think we are, and we all too often are, religious but not spiritual. That is to say, we busy ourselves with religious institutions and pay little attention to spirituality. Religious but not spiritual was a great gig in the 20th century. But today, it's an evolutionary dead end. Our only hope of survival as a religious species is to go in another direction. I suggest we go here. Spiritual but not dogmatic. Spirituality is the depth dimension to life. Could I just get you to read this with me? Ready? Spirituality is honoring the depth dimension of life. All right. You are very smart people, and you can remember that definition, especially if you read it again. Ready? Spirituality is honoring the depth dimension of life. Okay. You'll never have to ask again what that spirituality thing means. Now you know. Spirituality is honoring the depth dimension of life. Spiritual practices keep us connected with the depth dimension of life. There are spiritualities and spiritual practices for every theology, including the atheist and even the secular. And if you don't like that word, Mr. Coyote, marooned in a park, I suggest you get over it and learn to tell the tale. Live to tell the tale. If we want to live and serve and survive until the middle of the 21st century, we are going to have to offer spirituality, spiritual growth, and spiritual practices explicitly to our ever smaller public niche. We'll do it our way without dogma. We'll do it our way with rich and interesting variety and inclusive of atheism, humanism, and even secular outlooks. But we will do it or we will fade away. Because that's what the people who will come to us for the foreseeable future will be looking for. They'll be looking for the technologies, probably best developed in Buddhism, which settle the mind and soften the ego. They'll be looking for practices like chanting, singing, and rhythm, which raise energy and get us out of everyday mind. They'll be looking for rituals to express their love and for putting aside their worry. They will want to explore many forms of prayer. They will be looking for people to join with them in serving others to make the world a better place. At the moment, we do that latter pretty well, but that one thing is not enough. And in many of our congregations, the worship service is not only pretty cool and dry, it's an artifact of a past century of white Anglo-America. There are even some places, I'm sorry to say, where someone coming in to learn to pray would be met with scorn, or wanting to talk about a spiritual experience would quickly learn that we don't do that around here. That silence, that scorn, that lack of skillfulness in what the world wants right now, we have to get over that and learn to do better if we're going to thrive in this new world. A spiritual but not dogmatic congregation would offer worship services that touch the heart and engage the mind, religious education which teaches not just respect and knowledge of other faiths, but the spiritual practices of other faiths, and will imagine that our whole lives involves not only our sexuality, but our spirituality. A spiritual but not dogmatic congregation would be a safe place to discuss spiritual subjects and our own precious, tenuous, always hard to talk about spiritual lives. We would not allow scorn of spirituality any more than we allow scorn of sexual orientation or social background. UUs would understand that the tools of college debate teams and scientific laboratories are fine for those enterprises, but they are problematic around matters of faith and spirit. It's hard enough to put the largely wordless spiritual life into words at all. The wild, shy soul doesn't respond well to being chased, questioned, hounded, or scorned. So, for instance, we were in the process of making some adjustments to our worship service about 10 years ago, where we took the offering and how we greeted each other and all that sort of stuff. We make changes in Albuquerque by doing trial periods and then soliciting feedback. So, after making several changes that we all knew we had to make, I added, for the trial period, the possible practice of ending the pastoral prayer with my saying, "Peace be with you," and them responding, "And also with you." I'd been on sabbatical, you see, visiting around my interfaith colleagues' congregations, and I had been so touched by this mutual blessing of pastor and people. I asked my congregation to indulge me in that for a few weeks, told them how much it would mean to me to have their blessing, pointed out that this practice admits of every kind of theology, and reminded them that it was only for the 6-week trial, and then no doubt they would vote it out of the liturgy. And they laughed, just the way you're laughing, and that's exactly what they expected to do. But you know what? At the end of the 6 weeks, they didn't. Turns out they kind of liked engaging in that mutual blessing with their minister. It remains one of the poignant moments in our liturgy, to me, week after week, and for them also. And people tell me that it's one of the predictable times in the service when they can feel themselves tearing up. Me too. Should every church include this kind of liturgy? No. It works well in our blended worship, and it wouldn't work well everywhere. But if there's not a place in your liturgy where people find themselves predictably tearing up, some place that they come for even if the sermon topic is not interesting to them that week, then a congregation is edged into the religious but not spiritual realm. The nuns are an ever larger part of the religious ecology. The spiritual but not religious are the group within the nuns that might be available to us. Another bright spot in the religious ecology is the number of people who identify to researchers not as nuns, but as Unitarian Universalists. Almost 500,000 adults, as a matter of fact, which means that's 3 times as many people seem to think of themselves as UUs than are actually belonging to our congregations. Some of them are our friends. Some of them are on our mailing list. Some of them are our children away at college. And some have moved out of range of our congregations, but most of them are, frankly, alums. Some are in college, come visit church when they're home, some go to our camps and conferences, but somehow or other they all feel still close enough to talk about us to pollsters. They're not mad. They're not religiously unaffiliated. We discovered the fact of their existence only a few years back, and we are still wondering who the heck they are. We've been calling them the free-range UUs after all the chicken lovers in the crowd. But you know what? They haven't heard us calling them back to the coop, and they haven't come home. We don't know much about them, but we could find out. On the Campfire website, there was a prominent button for alums. Now you remember that I was not much of a Campfire girl. This is all my family's problem, not mine. And I was on their website looking for the official title of this friend of my sister's so I could talk to her. But thinking about our free-range UU program problem, I clicked and filled out the alum registration page just to see what it was like. Campfire asked when I was active, what camp I had gone to, should anyone be looking for me, not much chance of that, and what I got out of my participation and how it had contributed to my life successes, which they also asked about on this page. And as I thought about it, it really was kind of complicated, actually. I didn't have such a good time in Campfire, but it did bring to mind something that I had completely forgotten, which is that I learned dozens of songs in Campfire that I still sing with the children of my church. I'd forgotten that. And you know what? After I filled out that page, I felt like a part of the Campfire family again. Not only admiring them from afar, but actually grateful from within. And I have to tell you that if once a year, not much more often than that, but once a year they sent me a well-crafted request for money, I probably would send them some. I might even go to a local event. And I would be much more likely to recommend to my neighbor with young kids that she check out the Campfire program after school. It's on the tip of my tongue now. I'm a part of that crowd. You could have an alum page on your church's website. The UUA could have a alum page on its website. If we did, we'd start to know who was in our larger family, who felt good enough about us to tell researchers they were a part of us. We might even be able to figure out how to serve them, and we might even figure out how to get some money from them. And doesn't that sound like more fun than extinction? I think so too. In the winter UU World, Fred Muir wrote about our plight and made one of those earth-shattering, paradigm-changing suggestions. He suggested that we seriously start to consider ourselves not as an association, but as a movement. What's the difference? Well, an association is a group of like entities, in our case, congregations. Worked really well in 1825, gives the required freedom to congregations while offering some of the benefits of connection. That's an association. A movement, on the other hand, is a bunch of unlike entities which are going in the same direction, has similar values, and are somehow related. Schools, congregations, small groups, camps, social action teams, church members, free rangers, and the unaffiliated who join with them. Associations rather tamely support each other. Movements are much more likely to develop real power. Let's start thinking bigger and make sure that we count all our friends in this changed social environment. The last thing a coyote does when she wants to survive in a new environment is to take very, very good care of her pups, the future. And by the time we get to the middle of this century, the future of Unitarian Universalism isn't going to be with me anymore, and it's not going to be with almost any of you. We'll be gone. But we have important work to do before we go. And that is to make sure that our congregations have a mission and a modus operandi which is appropriate to the 21st century. We've talked about mission. We've talked about the strength of being a movement. Let's talk a little bit about attracting this elusive younger set of generations. There is first the matter of communication. I noticed last January when we got our phone books, y'all get your phone books in January? They get delivered to the door. And what I noticed is that this year they came with a great big sheet of blue paper stuck in them that said, this is how you go online to opt out of getting paper phone books from now on. There's no phone number for this. You have to go online to opt out of getting phone books. Phone books are dead. I hope none of your congregations are spending very much money on phone books anymore. I don't have to tell you that the 21st century is an internet-driven world. And I'm sure that all your congregations have websites that give visitors the information they need to visit your congregation, and hopefully those websites are optimized for mobile devices. That's what we learned to do at the end of the 20th century. But time to change again, because studies tell us that connected adults, and that's almost everybody now, not only here, but all over the world, go online. Not just for information, but for sources of inspiration and spiritual guidance. That means your website has to not only tell people how to get to you, but also how to start doing what you do. And what you do, remember, in this changed ecology, is offer opportunities for spiritual growth within a theologically diverse community. Being spiritual, but non-dogmatic. And how can your website help people grow spiritually? Well, with links to sermons and worship and maybe even adult course audio and video, as well as links to resources used by spiritual people like you. That BeliefNet online quiz, for instance, as a link should be on every website. Blogs of UU writers like Melissa Harris Perry and James Ford and others who show the diversities that we are so proud of. There could also be links to meditation timers and daily inspiration, Twitter feeds and I-Ching generators, and websites of related organizations and reading lists, and tips on helping children get the most out of Sunday school and how to celebrate holidays in a religiously blended household. If the UUA would maintain such pages, resourcing spiritual growth in individual congregations would just link to them. But for the moment, we're on our own, and we should be trying this. And of course, there will be a link there to sign up for the email that has the congregation's publicity on it, because emailed newsletters are virtually free and fabulous publicity, and the way more and more people are getting their information these days. But that's the easy stuff. Much harder, a 21st century church worships differently from a 19th century church or a 20th century church. This is where we least like change. But the fact of the matter is that what feeds your hearts and souls and my heart and soul does not always feed the souls of those spiritual but not religious and younger adults we need to serve in order to survive. In fact, some things like the hymnal, they can't even access. The world of No Child Left Behind and Title IX soccer have meant that the majority of people younger than 30 cannot read music, and at least half of those who were raised in any church were raised in a church with a band, not an organ, and they don't know a single tune in that gray book. That doesn't mean you can never sing those old-fashioned hymns, but it means you can't approach them as if everybody knew them from the cradle, which we could in 1950. It means that you have to choose the easy ones, teach them over and over again, sing them often, and alternate them with genres of music which are more congenial to the younger ear. It means there might be a drum set in your chancel. How many of you have ever had a drum set in your chancel? Some, come on, all right. It wasn't so bad, was it? Especially if they're electronic and don't make quite so much noise. And every time you're tempted to say to some of this stuff, that isn't worshipful, you will say instead, my, it is so nice to see the younger people so engaged, because they are our future. My congregation is going to be a survivor. The 21st century is a visual century, and churches are going to have to get with the program or go down the tubes. Yes, you need to find a graceful way to project visuals. Yes, today's preachers need to learn not only PowerPoint, but the art of visually engaging sermon writing. Do I wish this weren't so? Oh, I do. But I value a healthy, growing, cross-generational church, and that's what it takes. As a movement, we will need to help all of our congregations be sources of spiritual but not dogmatic in their communities, and that will be a special challenge for lay-led congregations. The future for lay-led congregations is especially bleak. In the days when people sought out our congregations because they offered freedom, religious professionals were not seen as necessary. Desirable, perhaps, but not necessary. But remember, very few people are coming looking for freedom anymore. They will be looking for spiritual growth in non-dogmatic, spacious atmospheres, and that requires a religious professional. At the moment, half of our UU congregations are too small to afford religious leadership of the kind that we now have. The person who has devoted 3 to 5 years of very specialized training, jumped through formidable hoops, and expects to operate as an independent expert and be paid accordingly. That's the only kind of minister we have right now. I see 2 solutions to this problem, and I think we should pursue both. The reason we need these solutions is eloquently displayed on this map. This map shows where UU congregations are and estimates population saturation from less than 0.1%, that's the darkest green, to 1%, that's red, of which, if you've got very good eyes, you can see 2 little blotches. But any color is good. White is no countable UUs in that county by church. See those vast underserved areas? There are a lot of in New Mexico, too. They are rural areas, but they are dotted with small towns that might have congregations or branches of congregation, groups of 10 to 20 religious liberals. Here's your neck of the woods. Just as the medical profession is coping with its changing ecology by bringing on paraprofessionals and authorizing nurses to do what only those independent experts, the doctors, ever did before, so we must adopt and train a cadre of supported, supervised lay ministers, or chaplains, or deacons, or whatever we decide to call them, who will work on a part-time basis, probably within their own home congregations, to offer spiritual resources, encouragement, and pastoral care to their own people. Secondly, we need to help lay-led groups, including groups which have chaplains and lay ministers, get access to the sermons delivered in larger churches by those theologically trained professionals, our ministers. Once again, the standard fellowship programs of interesting talks by community members and professors from local colleges was an enormous success in the 20th century, but it isn't anymore. Week after week, fellowships need, dare I say it, real sermons. The technology to do this by video is available and not all that difficult. The Albuquerque congregation includes 4 groups that use our videos as the centerpiece of informal small group worship services, and we sell packages of 4 sermon videos and readings to a dozen grateful lay-led congregations every year for $100. The sermons cover the sort of UU 101 topics which are hard for small groups in isolated areas to procure locally. Our branches, 3 in very small towns and 1 in a large retirement community, are grateful to be part of an experiment in multi-site congregations. They are all way too small to be independent congregations, and they are unendingly appreciative of the support they get by being a part of First Unitarian. The fellowships which subscribe to our 4-sermon series are likewise very grateful, and I'll tell you, they want more. There's reasons that we can't give them more than 4 a year, but some of you could. Colleagues, larger congregations, UU TED Talks, come on, we can do this. We are in a position to make an enormous difference in our movement by sharing the work of ministry with our smallest congregations. It all goes back to the question, what do we do to survive in a new ecology? Do we want to survive so much that we're willing to adapt, to change, to try new things? I just mentioned a few possibilities. There are no doubt plenty more. Has Unitarian Universalism been so good for you in your life that you want it to be good for others? If so, Mr. Coyote, Madam Coyote, you know what you have to do. You're all very brave, dedicated people to be here today, and I so appreciate that. Peace be with you all. Thank you. We have about 15 minutes for a time for comments and conversation, and we have a runner with a mic. You got to stand up and speak with the mic. Is there anybody who would like to start off a time of comments and conversations?
Maybe I wasn't listening carefully enough, but I came back to UUism because somebody told me about it. My brother was involved, but I came back for community and not spirituality per se, but for community.
Community is good, and it's part of what people appreciate even if they don't come for it. It's just that the more things that Mr. Coyote eats in that park, the more likely he is to survive. The more entrees we have, the better off we are. Maybe it would be good for you to introduce yourselves too and say where you're from.
There's a hand over here. Oh, there.
Hi, Christine. Kendall Gibbons, the new minister at All Souls in Kansas City. It was very clear to me when you were mentioning the free-range Unitarian Universalists, who some of them are, they're my sister and my brother, who grew up in the same Unitarian Universalist church I grew up in, who from time to time have tried and came to a congregation where there was no one within 20 years of their age, came to a congregation where worship was really badly done, basically have given up. But if you press them what they are, they'll still say they're Unitarian Universalists, but they have not been well served by our movement.
Right. If I had to make a guess as to who those 500,000 UUs were, my guess is that they are our children. The numbers add up over 30 years.
Linda Cherlin from St. Paul in Unity. Thank you. I'm just completely fired up.
Oh, good.
I think one of the biggest things our bigger congregations should do right now is gather in the small ones around us and develop a mission towards movement and see how we can speak out. I'm inspired to talk about and go back and do that. I just wanted to thank you again.
Good. Yeah, I think that is an important strategy for big metropolitan areas. There's one here.
Alan Agley from Davenport. Some of the free-range people also have remembrances of personality conflicts within the congregation. where we have not behaved as well as we might have.
That's right. There's nothing that repels people, especially if they're coming for spiritual growth and depth in their life, as much as a fight.
I just had a comment about community, because I think, too, community is very important. But I'm of a different generation than my grandchildren. And they find community in Facebook. And so I'm thinking that they would find the community in a very real but different way than we think of it. And I think, it seems to me that if your only connection is being several miles apart in Iowa and somehow sharing that experience, that they probably would flock to a real-life conference where they would actually meet the person. Think about all the people you know now, and when you say, where did you meet? They say, on the internet. And they're married. So
That's one important thing that alum button can do,
yes,
is help people meet and re-meet.
I find that sometimes we're willing to address issues that are 60 years old, like the Holocaust. We don't mind talking about that. But we don't really want to address a lot of the issues that are current today, because we already know that the Holocaust was a bad thing. We already know that discrimination against homosexuals is a bad thing, because the culture has already said, yeah, we put our stamp of approval on a change. But sometimes I don't think we're really out in the forefront of correcting some of the social ills that are really plaguing the majority of the population of the world. And I'd love to see us moving in that direction.
I'm Miriam Kasha. I belong to the Iowa City Church. I was raised in a Methodist parsonage, so I'm very churched. Both grandfathers were Methodist ministers, and a brother. So I came to the UU because I wanted that kind of community and the familiarity. But I, for more than 20 years, 30 years, have not felt that I got my spiritual needs met at the UU. So I've gone outside, and I have had various places, including a women's group, including other study groups and so forth, where I get my spiritual needs met. So I'm thrilled by what you're saying. And I also want to encourage those of us who have done our spiritual work in alternative ways to step up to the plate and offer that in our church community.
See if you can move it back in. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kathy Schnitzius. I'm from the La Crosse Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. And we don't have a minister, and we are all volunteer except for, very part-time DRE and music minister, and now we're going to have kind of a church secretary. But I'm wondering, if we're getting people who are, what one of our younger members said, are takers, and they're coming to, get spirituality or get community or something like that, but not necessarily feeling community enough to feel the pull toward volunteerism, and all the rest of us are getting older enough that we're starting to diminish the amount of time we're putting toward volunteerism. Where are we going to be able to get the energy that we need to keep going if we can't afford to hire professionals?
So that is one way to frame the problem. Another way to frame the problem might be, how in this changed world of changed time demands on family do we make church easy enough that people can make the contribution that their lives allow them to make and feel good about it and keep the place going? And because the reality is, and this is really going to get worse, because the churches that I have served were since the feminist revolution. This last block of time, churches have been served by early retirees. And you know what we're not going to have anymore? Early retirees. We now have a generation of people without defined benefit pensions who were scared to death by this last recession and are not going to quit working because they can't afford to without, it's no longer knowable how much money you need to have to retire. So this problem that we all have of getting enough volunteers is only going to be worse. And we have to find ways to make it easier. And one of the reasons that the branch concept works is that it takes 90% of the problem of service organization off the backs of unprepared volunteers and allows them to simply use a resource that they download from the internet instead of trying to get a different speaker to come talk to them every week. So, yes, Mark. Is that Mark? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm Ron McGraw from the local congregation, and we, in the 1960s, we paid for a large billboard ad which said, "Are you a closet Unitarian?" Mm-hmm. And it actually worked. We got quite a few people showing up. But it also illustrates that many of the things we fought for, we are virtually have won them. Mm-hmm. And how do we advertise spirituality?
Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of like that mean-looking dog up there myself, but no doubt there are many ways, right?
Mark Gibbons, Church of the Larger Fellowship. I thought I would bring up the fact that among those free-range UUs include a huge number of people. At last I knew, over 1 in 100 adults in this country were in prison. It's not work release, that's actually incarcerated. A tremendous number of people serve in our armed forces and do not reside close to a UU congregation. And a lot of our congregations don't do much to serve the military population. And we still have an awful lot of bricks and mortar congregations that are not hospitable to people with accessibility issues. So the free range UUs are much more diverse and need to be addressed in some pretty special ways.
Right. And the Church of the Larger Fellowship is doing wonderful ministry in teaching us all how to do online things and also in their prison ministry. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Eric Berglund from the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, and I'm going to take on the role of conference crackpot now. First of all, I entirely agree with you about spirituality, but I had a conversation with one of our congregants who's about 30 years old last night, and I said, "What do you think of the name of our organization?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I spend 15 minutes telling people, what does Unitarian, Universalism, what do those words mean?" And I said, "Wouldn't it be cool if we had a more marketable, a simpler name to our movement?" Now, do I have an alternative? No, but sometimes I think, wow, what a name.
It is.
It's too much.
It's such an irony that our non-doctrinal faith is named with two doctrines, don't you think? It's like,
Hi, Amy Nelson from Rochester, Minnesota. One thing that I've noticed, and the delegates from my church will agree with me that I've kind of pushed this, is one thing UUs really shy away from is evangelizing. And not in the way that we usually think of that word, but in the way that I grew up in Fargo, North Dakota, and had no idea that there was a UU church there until probably 5 years ago. So really getting the word out, you know, where are you from, what do you do? That's what a lot of other religions do, is really say, this is who we are. Right. And I think we need to do a better job of that.
Totally agree.
I'm Heather Flory with the Cedar Valley Unitarian Universalists in Cedar Falls. And a simple suggestion to our crackpot in the room is maybe we need to look at, I loved your idea of association versus movement. Maybe we need to change it to the Unitarian Universalist movement instead of the Unitarian Universalist Association.
That's a hard one. We all in the room are so fond of those words.
Fritz Hudson of Lincoln, Nebraska. I want to push your definition of spirituality, and it's been stimulated by several questions, which is, what's the interpersonal, and I want to say service-oriented dimension of spirituality? I'm thinking of the praxis model of spiritual growth, which is engage and then reflect. Tell me, having young adult children and knowing from our congregation, which is fairly successful with young adults, they're very service-oriented, and I'm wondering whether that's part of the spirituality you're looking for.
I think it could be. I definitely think that for some people, their spirituality, their sense of being connected deeply to the world is best engaged by offering service to others. I mean, that's how they get that feeling of connection the best. And so I consider offering the ability to both serve and reflect on what it's doing to you and in you to serve, which is the part that's often left out, but is easy enough to add. That's a very important chunk of spirituality. What it's not, in my opinion, is the be-all and end-all of Unitarian Universalism. I do not think we actually exist to make the world a better place by offering service projects, although that's a part of how we do what we exist for, and a very viable one for lots of people, and maybe especially younger people, or maybe especially as a easy way to entice people in to see if there may be other ways that they also want to go deeper in their lives.
Sue Daly from Duluth, Minnesota, and I appreciate the importance of thinking of ourselves as a movement. I think our congregations have a lot of people who stick their necks out and do wonderful work in our communities toward making enormous, important changes. Some of those people may be in our social justice committees. Some of those people are totally unconnected with our social justice committees and yet doing enormous work. And I think we could use some help and some new ideas about how to acknowledge and support and reinforce those people, particularly in this world when people who stick their necks out end up getting isolated and even threatened. And if we can find ways that our spiritual communities can embrace those people and support them and have their backs in more ways than our more traditional churches, our traditional communities often do, I think that would make us a more welcoming place for the change makers in our communities.
Thanks so much. And Robin's back here to tell us that we're out of time, but I'll be hanging out by the book table over there if anybody else wants to make any comments. Thanks so much. You've been a great...
And thank you, and that will be all for now. And we can all head out, have a little bit of a break, and then you'll head off to your first workshop slots. And if you have trouble finding a room, go ahead and ask a purple person in an orange hat.